Welcome back to the Teacher Experience Podcast. In today's episodes, we're delving deep into the world of ADHD. From dispelling myths to exploring coping strategies, we'll uncover the diverse experiences of individuals living with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Whether you're seeking support, information, or simply a better understanding, this episode is definitely for you. So today we have a special guest joining us, Laura. So Laura will be sharing her personal journey of being diagnosed with ADHD later on in life and the unique challenges and triumphs that have come with it. From navigating school to building her business to understanding her own brain, Laura's story sheds a light on the importance of awareness and acceptance. So our teachers listening will know that schools are heavily involved in the diagnosis process for any kids that are under the age of 18. However, training to become a teacher includes little to no training on special educational needs, and that is why these conversations are so important. Without further ado, welcome Laura.
Really nervous now. You were so professional that I feel like I'm back at school, and now I'm like, oh God, you should, okay. Hi, thank you. I'm joking. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. I actually practiced that loads of times because I get nervous reading because of my dyslexia.
I'm just really jealous that you actually planned that out and read this really beautiful, professional, succinct. And I just literally got on the microphone and I'm like, hi. So yeah, this is how organised people do it. I'm very impressed. I'm going to try it. Maybe I'm never going to try it.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to have you. Now, we use a teaching strategy to start our podcast, and it's called our WWW and EBI. So we would love if you could share your what went well for this week.
Well, I don't know, because I've had a day of it. What went well this week? What have I done this week that's gone well? I really honestly don't know, because I tell you why, right? First of all, you are going to have to go teacher on me and rein me in, because I really am just going to go all over the place. Today, what is it now? It's like 4:00 in the afternoon. The episode was supposed to be out at 7 a.m. and I haven't finished editing it. So I'm not really sure what's going on. No, I'm joking. I've had quite a few interviews today and they've all gone really, really well, because I just think, like you said, conversations like these are so important. And I've had the absolute honour and privilege of speaking to some absolutely inspirational people that are doing wonderful things about this topic that I feel so passionate about. So yeah, that's gone well this week.
That's good. I'm so glad to hear. And then our other teaching strategy is our EBI. So what is your even better if today could have gone even better?
I could have actually got the episode finished. Do you know what it is actually? Is that I'm not very good at scheduling things. So somebody I work closely with, she said, right, we're going to do this Calendly thing and we're going to book all this in. And then I woke up suddenly, I was like, Jesus Christ, I have all of these interviews in one day, because I'm not used to it. I'm used to just individually approaching people and saying, okay, I'll do this then and this then. And my calendar's just filled up. And actually what I've learned is that I need to make sure that although I'm sending this link out, which in theory is better for organisation, I need to make sure that I've blocked out time for myself, so that I'm not just running around and not getting the episodes out.
Yeah, absolutely. In teaching, oh my goodness, the amount of things that we need to do in one day is completely overwhelming. When I first started teaching, I always considered myself quite organised. It's just kind of my personality. I was just naturally quite organised, but even in teaching, I felt so overwhelmed most of the time, and I'm terrible at prioritising just me time. And I love that time in the day, even if it's just 15 minutes to have a cup of tea, no one speak to me, just have my lunch on my own. Prioritising that time is so important.
Do you know, I honestly have sorry. So just to being my podcast, I'm just totally sabotaging everything. I just wanted to say I have so much respect for what you do, the teaching profession. My mum was a teacher, and it is such a hard job and such an important job. And quite often it is you guys that get the bashing as well and get the blame for things. And I've just watched it my whole life and known you know, for my mum, when she retired, she found it really, really hard to retire because she knew the work that she was doing was making a difference. So it's always like, oh, just do one more school year or whatever. And it took a really long time. So yeah, hats off to you guys. Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. Do you mind me asking what year group she teaches? Because me and Miss Wild are in secondary schools.
Yeah, so actually my mum, she wasn't a straightforward teacher. She, my understanding of it is that she opened, she brought the Prue to Norfolk. So we moved from London to Norfolk. And so she kind of was in charge of a facility, probably not using the right language, that helps keep children that have been kicked out of school in education. While she went to different head teachers to basically beg them to take the kids that had been kicked out, kind of thing. So it was kind of some and some. It was quite an intense job that she had. Yeah.
I'd absolutely love to work in a Prue. I think they sound absolutely fantastic, and the work teachers have to do when they work in a Prue is just incredible. So hats off to your mum for having that job.
Well, do you know what? The Queen actually gave her a medal. She did get an MBE for it in the end. Yeah,
oh,
we went to Buckingham
amazing.
Palace. Yeah.
Oh, did you get to go as well?
Yeah, I went. Yeah, and it was so funny because my mum's always really early for everything. So we got there and we were like, it was like literally like an actual beefeater. They're a real thing. It was like, oh, you guys are early. You get the best seats in the house. So we sat on the front row, looking at the stage, and then like stage right, the Queen just walked down the corridor just like totally normal. There's the actual Queen in a little mint green, you know, one of her little outfits, and she sat dead in front of me, like right in front of me. And me being me, impulsive, ridiculous ADHD person, I looked up at a moment and I caught her eye like straight on, and I just went like you right? What have I just done? Sorry, that was the actual Queen. Oh,
I'm pretty sure I meant to curtsy. And I went, all right.
Really, so you are going to regret inviting me on this podcast, girls. You really are.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I love it. So good. Oh my goodness, that's so funny that you did that to little Queenie. Bless her heart.
I know. God rest her soul. Yeah.
Obviously, she's done amazing work if she got a medal from the Queen. So good for her.
Right. Yeah.
So obviously I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and I know that you talk about the journey to getting diagnosed as your safari. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I have a strange dislike for that word, just because for the longest time it was annoying me that I couldn't think of another one. And then somebody from the community said, how about safari? And it fits with all the leopard print. So safari it is.
Yeah, I love that. So talking about ADHD diagnoses then, and then you've obviously spoken about the fact that the safari to you getting diagnosed on your podcast, but obviously we'd like to share that with our listeners. So when did you find out you had ADHD, and what was the whole experience like with leading up to that diagnosis?
So I was having a conversation with a friend. I mean, it's like, how far back do you want to go? Like, ADHD rarely comes alone. And so I suffered with the stereotype of ADHD. I was born in 83, right? So the stereotype of ADHD is just naughty little boys leaping off things. You know, that's it. That's all we knew. So obviously now when you look at it, I remember the first time I looked at the symptoms and how they can present differently, and being like, is this actually a wind up? Like, somebody has just written down my personality. Are you joking? It's the most obvious thing in the entire world. But I first was really struggling with an eating disorder and anxiety and depression from the age of about 14, really. I started going to the doctors. I was given prescriptions for Prozac, all sorts of things. I tried everything with the eating disorder stuff, you know, hypnotherapy, CBT, all the things, and just couldn't ever really quite get a hold of it. And then when I was about 30 something, I've got dyscalculia. I'm not very good with numbers. I must have been about 34, 35. A friend of mine who I see as really like having it all together, said to me that she'd been diagnosed with ADHD. And I was like, well, what on earth does that look like for you? Because I would never think that at all. And she explained some of the symptoms, of which I very much share. And I said, oh, bloody hell. Well, if you've got it, I definitely have. And she was just like, yeah, that's why I'm telling you about it. So from that point, I was like, oh, wow, okay, I've got this thing. Oh, well, that's interesting. Like, didn't understand the weight of it, the ways in which it impacts my life, and the link that those other conditions of which I was speaking about are actually co-occurring and linked. I didn't understand any of it. So I didn't do the education. I didn't teach. I didn't learn about it. I went about my business. And at some point I fell into a hole. And I basically, it was just before the pandemic. I was very, very depressed, and I decided to get a diagnosis. Now, to my mind, I thought it was going to be exactly like every other doctor's appointment I'd ever have. I'd walk into the GP, I'd say, I'm struggling with X and Y, I think it's ADHD. And like with depression, they would give me a pot of pills and go, there you go, try that. Take 2 of them, call me in the morning. I had no idea about any of it, right? So I go to the doctors, start the process with no clue of how long it's going to take. And then amongst all of that, the global pandemic swept in, and I basically sat down on the sofa and didn't get up off it for a couple of years. They were very, 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 very dark times, and I'm very lucky to be here. And then as we were coming out of the pandemic, meanwhile, I'd moved to Aberdeen, Scotland for my husband's job, and found out that gave me access to private healthcare. And I had, when we were first, which I never would have, one of the ways in which ADHD absolutely destroys my life is I've never been very good with money. So I never, or holding down a normal job either. So I've never had any money. I would never be able to afford private healthcare. It's not something I ever thought I would have access to. And I met my neighbour who had just found out that minute that she might have it through a conversation with a friend as well. And the first conversation we had, I had a barbecue. We were just allowed to socialise outdoors for the first time. And I said to her, she said to me, I'm really sorry if I talk too much. I think I've got ADHD. And I said, oh my God, no way, me too. And then she was then going to the NHS. So that it'd been 3 years of me on a waiting list that I never heard anything from, that she started. And that was when I asked, oh, what is this private healthcare business? Can I get a diagnosis for ADHD on that? And they told me that if I was also experiencing, or if it was leading to me, or there's something in the wording of if I also suffered depression, then that would pass, that they would let that happen. And I was just like, yeah, basically every day of my life. So that was it. So then from that point, it only took maybe, I think 3 months or maybe 4 months from reaching out to Bupa and getting diagnosed, whereas I'd been on a waiting list with the NHS for 3 years prior to that. I don't even know if I've just answered your question or not. Please tell me if I haven't.
I don't know either, but it was so interesting. And genuinely, Laura, thank you so much for being so honest, because I think there will be a lot of listeners that have either experienced what you've been through, are experiencing it, and haven't reached out for help, or are witnessing it in other people. And I think, again, like we said, just talking about it is so important. And especially for the fact that you were in that sort of, what's the word? Not demographic, I suppose the age where at school it wasn't picked up, it wasn't being spoken about. And like you said, the stereotype was, oh, they're just naughty. That's what it was. Whereas now we actually go, is it just naughty, or do we need to look into that deeper? Really, really good of you, brave of you, to talk about your experiences growing up, and the fact that you've obviously had an eating disorder, dealt with anxiety, dealt with depression. And actually, when you've sort of spoken to people and had those conversations through word of mouth, realised that actually all of that is linked to the ADHD, and that's the conversation that needs to be happening, because everything is often interlinked. And obviously you spoke about dyscalculia as well. I actually only learned how to say that word last week.
It's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. Do you know what else? My other co-occurring condition, which I think is absolutely so enormous, such an enormous part of me, and I'm only self-diagnosed at this point. I haven't sought a medical diagnosis, but I am so dyspraxic. I am quite clearly very, very, very dyspraxic. I've never been. I can't drive. I can't walk down hills. Like I can't. Like I'm not even joking. Like gravity does not seem to work for me. It's a ridiculous thing. But yeah, I'm only just learning about that really now. But I think I'm very, very dyspraxic. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because we did a assembly at school last week, because obviously it was neurodiversity celebration week last week.
Yeah.
And it was so, I think it was really eye-opening for the kids, as well as obviously as teachers we run the assemblies, and listening to all of the information, and teachers actually actively going out and researching about it as well, because I feel like the word neurodivergent and neurodiversity is actually quite new to be being used as a regular word in everybody's everyday life. Mm-hmm, so actually discussing all of those different words, all of the different diagnoses has been really helpful for teachers and students alike to go, oh, I didn't know what that was. And actually it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have the conversation, as long as we're doing it in a nice, polite way where we respect everyone. We need to be talking about it, and we need to encourage the kids to talk about it respectfully, so that they understand what's happening to them and they can ask for support. But interesting that you went through, obviously, the NHS and didn't get very far, and was on ridiculous waiting lists, and then you've gone private, and it's been sort of, you've got that diagnosis within, what did you say, 4 months?
Yeah, so it's honestly it's a privilege, it's a paid for privilege or a postcode lottery. That's how it is. And the thing about it, and obviously I don't want to, cast such a dark cloud over your podcast, but like the reason why it's so important is that undiagnosed ADHD, or ADHDers in general, we are more prone to self-harm and death by suicide or premature death through accidents, traffic accidents, all sorts of things. So, it really, really is so vital that people can access the support, because lives literally depend on it. Like that's what we're talking about. It's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that as well, because I think, like, I didn't know that's that fact. So thank you for enlightening me.
Yeah.
And again, it's why I feel, although Miss Dearman and I have obviously worked hard to get to this position that we're doing, like, I feel so privileged to be able to talk to people and have these conversations. So we've touched on it a little bit, but I suppose, what was your experience at school? I know you touched on sort of the stereotype of just being naughty, but did you have any like particular experiences that you'd like to share with us about not knowing you had ADHD, and then what that meant for your life in school?
I think the one that really, really stands out is...
Jess had a hand up. Such a teacher. Jess, you okay?
I was just putting my hand up because I wanted to share something with you, Laura. I had a really close family member of mine, which is another reason why I went into special educational needs. Really close family member of mine got diagnosed with ADHD in her 20s. And she spent the whole of school in something that we call D9, which is basically an isolation room for the naughty kids. That was her whole experience of school. So we literally called it isolation. So we would put her in a room all day. Work would get sent up to her to complete on her own for 7 hours a day. And that was her experience. She didn't know she had ADHD. This was about 10 years ago, so it still wasn't really talked about at all. And yeah, she'd spend the whole time there in that room. And you think about the mental health implications of that. It's just astounding.
Hannibal Lecter, put the woman in a muzzle. My God, it's horrendous. It's horrendous. And it is. It's like, you are being, you are othered. You are separate from society when you are actually put outside of us and them. It's a horrendous thing. It truly is. It's funny because with my mum working in education, it was such an enormous, what's the word I'm looking for? Expectation. There was a lot of pressure put on me, and I had to do well. It was important to do well, and I could do really well in some subjects, and then in others not at all, or even more annoying, when those teenage hormones kicked in, even in the subjects that I did like, that were getting the dopamine going and I could concentrate and I could thrive in, some days not so much. So what that looks like is you're not trying. So it's not just the idea of obviously the even the stereotype of an ADHD teacher's I can't think of the word report would be could try harder, could do better. Mine was like, this person is purposefully not using the talents that we've seen that they have. So, one day I'm doing brilliantly well, and the other day I can barely pay attention or string a sentence together. They're like, why are you rebelling? Why are you sabotaging? Why are you acting up effectively? What was interesting alongside that was that I really struggled to do homework. And so, for example, I was really good in English. I've always been, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I'm quite good at writing. I'm all right at writing. I'm confident at writing essays, and it just kind of pours out and I can write stuff. Okay. And then I would be doing really, really well in class or even in exams. But then when I had coursework to do to bring it back in, it was always late, very, very, or if not late, then left to the very last minute. Now, the one particular situation that just sticks out in my mind that I have to share with you is there was my English teacher, and it was for GCSE, English literature, I can't remember. But I basically had to get about 4 or all of my coursework for the year, something like that. I had to get it all in. I'd left it all to the very last minute and I had to get it in. And she is literally saying to me, you failed, you're not going to pass this. And it's an absolute tragedy because you could have done so well, you do so well, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I go to bed, I go home that night and I got everyone done. Obviously, of course I did, because of the pressure, because that deadline was breathing down my neck, because of the hyper focus. I got it all done. I got it in. Now, when I got it in, she read through it. She held me back. To begin with, she couldn't even believe that I'd done it all, because she was like, how have you done all this in one night, right? But then she looked at it and she was so angry. And I was just like, and I remember looking at her, I was just like, I promise you I did do it. It wasn't anybody else. And she looked at me and she just said, I'm so angry with you. There are people in this classroom that have been working so hard all term who haven't even done as good a work as you have done in one night, like 4 or 5 essays, whatever it was. Like, that's she was even more angry with me. She was like, that's appalling that I was like wasting my talent and like wasting everybody's time when I could do well, and why would you do it? She was absolutely furious. And I remember being so upset, because I genuinely remember it, just thinking to myself, I know the answer to this and I don't have the language to convey it. And what that was is that, like, when I go home and I sit down to do my homework, I am so worried that I'm going to do it wrong. I am so worried about, I've got all of these different thoughts in my mind. I'm getting distracted. I'm thinking about, and the time blindness. So time has passed, hours and hours have passed, it's getting late. I have to go to bed. I've got school the next day. So I get into my bed and I lie there all night. And I worry about the fact that I haven't done the thing. I lie there and I worry and I think, oh my God, what am I going to tell them? And oh my God, what am I going to do? And so I have basically spent, so let's say I've got home from school at 4 in the afternoon and I'm not going back in till 9 the next day. And I've probably slept 2 hours if I'm lucky. And I have spent all of that time worrying when I could have just done the thing. And to try and convey that to somebody, I didn't have the language to do it, and I didn't know anybody else that had expressed anything similar. So my father had always had kind of mental health issues. I can quite clearly see that he's probably the most ADHD person that's ever lived on this earth. But all I knew was this kind of this stigma of him being, I don't want to use the language because it's offensive, but like not mentally well. Okay, is the best way I can dress that up for those primitive times in which I grew up. So I'm thinking to myself, I can't tell her what the problem is, because when I explain it, it doesn't make sense and it makes me look like that. So then they're going to think, they're going to lock me away. Do you know? Like I literally couldn't convey it any other way. So that was it really, is like, how do you explain to somebody that I've spent so much time thinking about this? I think I've done it. In my head, I've done it. I haven't actually put pen to paper, and suddenly the time's run out and I have to give this to you in an hour. And I can't tell you what I've done with all of these hours or why I haven't done it. Is it, you know, if you don't know what that is, that looks really scary. And that and similar behaviours have scared me my whole life, you know?
Yeah, I completely understand that. And it's, well, as much as I can, I completely understand it from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
And it's, I can't comprehend how difficult that must be for you, and how difficult it must have been for you growing up and not being able to relate to anyone, or not having anyone go to you, that's okay, that's a normal thing for you, that's how your brain works. And it's for that conversation to have never happened as you were growing up, that your brain just works differently. It doesn't mean it's bad, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong, it's just different. And actually, like you said, how amazing, like genuinely how amazing with your English that you could sit there and smash out however many essays it was and get a really good grade because of hyperfocus. I think it's so easy for people to go, well, ADHD is a bad thing, or dyscalculia is a bad thing. But actually, I told you I've only just learned it. Or dyslexia is a bad thing. And it's like, no, it's not bad. It's just different.
It's the
just
not knowing that you have it is the bad bit. If you know that you have it, it's not wrong or bad. It's just different. If you don't know you have it, it's terrifying and incredibly stressful and distressing. Because it's like you said, I genuinely felt like an alien. I looked around me and I saw everybody getting on, and I thought to myself, well, I am the only person like this in the world. I genuinely believed it. And, you know, when you are not just in school, you know, you have teachers that you don't want to get in trouble with, but also I had pressure from home that I should do well. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was get in trouble or let anybody down. And it just kept happening. And it was so frightening. It was really, really frightening and distressing and exhausting. I didn't sleep.
I can't cope without sleep. So I'm sure you're absolutely exhausted. I listened to, I actually can't remember who it was on Instagram earlier, but I was they'd done a post on neurodiversity, and they were saying how they just couldn't express themselves, and all of this was going on in their head. And when they were at school, every teacher would say that they're a really lovely girl, but, and then the next teacher would be, you're a really lovely girl, but, and actually we need to make sure that, I think for Miss Dearman as teachers, and obviously for our listeners as teachers, we're picking up on those cues and we're going through the channels as best we can to help these children. I was really, I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but I was at school the other day and there was a kid in the corridor, which are obviously not meant to be. So I was like, oh, you're right, darling. Like, should we get you to lesson? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I was like, what's the matter? You're not okay. He was like, well, I've just been kept behind and now you've stopped me in the lesson, like in the corridor. And I was like, yeah, it's all right. I'm just helping you. You're okay. I was like, why did you get kept behind? And he was like, well, he was like, apparently I'm special. And I was like, well, what do you mean because you're special? And he was like, well, I think they think I've got special needs. And I was like, well, what, like, obviously your teacher's had a bit more of an in-depth conversation than that. So like, let's talk about it. And he was like, oh, I don't really know. I think they've picked up on something. And I was like, oh, that's good that they picked up on it, and we're going to help you. And I said to him, do you know what it was? How are you feeling? He was like, I don't know what it was, but I'm fine and glad that they noticed. And it's like, actually, although he couldn't comprehend and he couldn't articulate what was going on, he knew it was the first step to him getting help. And it was really, I didn't know the child, and it was a very surface level conversation, but it was nice to see. And then the other thing I was just going to pick up on is you talking about, because I said I couldn't relate. And the only thing I can fully relate to is I was in a situation not that long ago where I was given this pack of information that I had to read and get some information out within the hour. And now I'm not diagnosed with anything, but I think I may be dyslexic, I'm not sure. But I knew as soon as I got given that piece of paper or that chunk of paper, I wouldn't be able to read it quick enough, and I wouldn't be able to get myself an answer quick enough. So I just went into sheer panic because I know I'm a slow reader, and I knew that there was an hour deadline, and I was like, I cannot do that. I know I can't. So I felt like I'd been set up to fail, but I couldn't work out how to articulate that without sounding unprofessional. And I instantly felt like a child again, because I was like, I don't know what to do in this situation, and I feel so out of my depth. And it was actually such a simple thing for me to go, right, well, actually, I could just read a little bit of it and do what I can. But I went into sheer panic of, oh my goodness, that's too much, I can't do it.
I would imagine that's probably what you all tell students, right? Do what you can, do your best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, do as I say, not as I do, kids.
yeah, exactly that. It's so funny. There was something that I wanted to say, and I keep forgetting what it is, which will happen a lot. What was it? Oh, yeah. I think, just in case it doesn't come to me again and I forget it again, is that I think that what I would really like to convey, and again, we can come back to this, you can remind me if this fits in better somewhere else, is that if a child is doing something that literally does not make sense, it doesn't make sense, then there's definitely something afoot. Do you know what I mean? It's not like just rebellion and badness and naughtiness and evilness or whatever. Like, it's not sticking two fingers up if they're literally cutting off their own nose to spite their face. If somebody keeps tripping up in the same way and doing something that is not just negatively impacting their life, but you know that not just doesn't make sense, they don't want to do, then there's definitely a lot of questions that need to be asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you think about the example that I gave, like, why would I do that to myself? Why would anybody do that to themselves when I was capable of doing it? And it wasn't like I was sat in the lesson like acting up. It was, that doesn't make sense.
There's a lot of conversations that I obviously have with other teachers and staff about choice behaviour, and that every behaviour that happens in a classroom is, a lot of it isn't their choice, and it's not a conscious action. And teachers don't get taught this when they get taught to be a teacher. So when a child is presenting in a certain way, that doesn't mean they're just being naughty and they're consciously aware of what they're doing. It might be impulsive behaviour, and it's not choice. And I really want listeners and teachers to be aware of this. So I'm so glad that you've raised it as well, that sometimes it genuinely is impulsive, and it's not just bad behaviour, detention, sanction, whatever your school's policy is. That's not the way to go about it. So thank you for raising that. I really appreciate that.
I also just wanted to say, I kept remembering it and forgetting it.
It's so hard, isn't it, when you're like, I want to say that. No, I can't remember what I was going to say.
I think we always try and find, when we don't have a diagnosis, you always kind of find reasons for your differences. because that's human nature as well. When you feel different, you try and make a reason for it. So like you said that you were an alien. For me, it was, I was stupid. So I think that's such a human behavior when you don't have actual something. I could say, right, I'm dyslexic. I'm not stupid, because that's what I told myself through the whole of my school. I focused on my sport because that's what I was good at. And I was like, okay, I'm not good at writing, reading. I'm good at sport. I'm just stupid at that part. And even through university, I would always say to Miss World, I was like, oh, I'm just not clever. I'm just not clever. It moved from being stupid to not being clever as my language matured as I got older. And then it was so nice when I got my diagnosis. I was like, oh, I'm dyslexic. And just that change in that one word from stupid to dyslexic, your whole mindset changes because you're no longer looking at yourself negatively. I was able to switch it quite quickly. Other people take longer to process, but I was no longer saying I'm stupid, which again just always has a negative impact because it's that negative version of yourself. Whereas I was dyslexic, and it was just having that diagnosis is so important. Sorry, Miss Ward, I took over. I'll pass it back on to you.
All right. No, it's amazing. No, it really is.
It's so interesting just to hear everyone's different point of views and just to hear everyone's different examples of what we, all three of us have been through and what loads of other people are going through or have been through. So yeah, brilliant. So just out of interest, do you know any teachers that are ADHD or have any experiences with teachers that have ADHD or any advice for teachers?
Yes, so one of my best friends here has ADHD. And she gets quite upset about the fact she's only just been diagnosed as well, similar age to me. And she said one of the things that she talks about is the fact that a lot of the time, as I've said before, teachers get a bashing, right? So you guys are responsible for it. They don't know education, blah, blah, blah. And she said, and this is just her experience, so I don't know, things can be different between England and Scotland, is that even if she can identify or she sees signs that a child might be neurodivergent, she isn't necessarily allowed to say that. And so the people that are calling for intervention, that quite often she's like, I can't just say, I think this child has ADHD. And so it's not something that she can leap in and do, but that could just be Scotland. I don't know. Do you know? Well,
Jess, do you want to comment on that one? Because you have more experience than I do.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that in England. So the process that we have in England is that if a teacher suspects any form of special educational need and disability, which is my role, so SENCO, they report it straight to me. So we have a reporting system where if you suspect anything suspicious, then you report it to me. Under special education needs and disability also forms mental health. So that includes anything like anxiety, depression, self-harm, as well as ADHD, dyslexia, anything like that. So teachers have a sort of mandatory right to report. It's actually within their job role that they have to do it in England.
And then what happens once it's been reported to you? What do you do with that information?
So then typically what I would do is then I would speak to every single teacher that pupil has. And then I would see if they've reported or have seen similar attributes, basically. And then I can formulate a pattern. And then at that point, if a pattern is occurring and there's something that I suspect, then I will bring the parents in for a meeting. And then we have a chat about the patterns that I'm seeing in school. And then if it is ADHD, for example, I will suggest the idea of going for a neurodevelopmental assessment, which, as you know, is up to 3 years wait on the NHS, or it's 6 months average on private healthcare. And I suggest both of them. And then the first step of the diagnosis, if the parents do decide to go for the assessment, is we fill out a 105 questionnaire. on the pupil, and that's my job. So I fill out, I meet all their teachers, I meet the pastoral team, head of year, I fill out 105 questions. It takes so. Did you have any last advice for teachers?
I mean, I do feel like we covered it when we were talking about the behaviour not being a choice. I do feel that was covered there. I think that obviously one of the people that I speak to quite a lot who does know about children and know more about children than me is ADHD Father UK, Jacob. He's based in Bristol. And he says that the number one problem for kids with ADHD is actually self-esteem. That's the thing that they struggle with the most over, outbursts or whatever. It's the self-esteem, because actually that's the one that dents and then leads to, exacerbating other problems. And so I guess if that's the number one problem, then that needs to be the number one focus. And so it's not just building up that self-esteem. And obviously, like, I literally feel like I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs right now. And as I said a million times, I know what a hard job you guys have and what hard work you do. But rather than me saying, oh, you need to make kids feel good, you're like, exactly how many hours in the day do you think I have with however many children in a class? But I guess what I would say is, in the ways that they fall down and the ways that they struggle, making sure that feels more like they're held and supported and understood in that, rather than chastised and judged and made to feel bad for that, is all I can see. Because obviously you can't spend your time nurturing however many children at once, but the ones that you have to pull out and say you've done something bad is, like you said, with your friend that was shut outside of the classroom. That is irreversible. Well, not irreversible, but that's a hell of a lot of counselling bills there, guys. Like, that's a lot of damage done,
Yeah,
and that to completely segregate somebody so they feel like they're not part of society, as I said, hard relate. So when kids do fall down, when they do act up, is that how can they obviously have to have discipline, but be supported in it and not feel like they're just bad, because that's only going to make it worse. Yeah. Again, teaching my grandmother to suck eggs.
Amazing.
No, not at all. Like, we're so grateful, because, like, I think as teachers we're so very aware that we're not experts in everything, and we want to hear from people. We want to have these conversations, because, like, we have weekly training, and I guarantee every week there is something that a teacher goes, oh, I didn't know that, or oh yeah, I forgot about that, or actually I don't know that bit of content. I was literally on a training course today, and we all sat there and we admitted that there are areas in our subject knowledge, especially for primary school, that they just don't know. So we're so grateful to have, like, be told things and talk about things, even if it's just a reminder for us to go, actually, we need to think about that a little bit more. And it's it's so helpful.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity, because it does need to be, everything. I mean, I wasn't saying patient-led, but we're not talking about medicine here. But, it is this kind of like lived experience. It does matter, like, how people end up. You don't want to end up like me, but do you know what I mean? It's like you have to. It's really lovely to have the opportunity to talk about it, and I think, the issue. One of the reasons why it does wind me up so much, the amount of pressure that is put on teachers, is that when you look at what is going on, and again, when I'm talking about the NHS, I'm not talking about the NHS. I'm talking about what has been done to the NHS that is on its knees. It's the greedy governments would never dream of bashing the NHS at all. But, the average GP in the UK has 1 hour of very basic training on outdated and gender biased research. So that's only 1 hour, so barely scraping the surface, on biased research that doesn't fit. So as it stands in the UK, to be able to get a diagnosis through the NHS, you have to go through the GP. They are the gatekeeper for diagnosis. So the person who gets to decide whether or not you get the opportunity to be assessed by somebody who knows what they're talking about doesn't know what they're talking about, right? So this is honestly, like, I really feel like, I mean, that doesn't make sense. I'm supposed to be the one with the wonky brain. That does not make sense, right? So I think really we are in this monumental moment in history. Genuinely, I believe that, like, this is a moment of mass awareness, and unfortunately, through the channels that be, through the pandemic, through social media, this awareness has been raised, and unfortunately the acceptance has not been raised at the same amount of time, all whilst people are trying to get help from people who do not have adequate training because there isn't the adequate resources, and round we go. So we're really in this absolutely bizarre time, but I do believe that things will not stay like this. They can't. It literally doesn't make sense. And so, you know, I hope that all of this will change in my lifetime. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
But yeah, things are moving. Yeah,
I think we need that translation from what's the word? What word did you just use? Awareness, that's it. We need the translation of awareness into adequate training for professionals. I think that's what needs to happen. So we've got the awareness, so we translate that awareness into training for GPs, into training for medical schools, so that when the people that are aware that they might have an issue and need some help go to the professionals are actually qualified and have the correct training in order to support the people that need it.
100%, because it's terrifying, isn't it? Because if you think about it, we've said all of that self-esteem knocking, potentially with a load of lovely comorbidities and drowning in self-loathing and possibly self-harming and the rest. You go to your GP and you go, I think I've got the answer. And they turn around and say, oh, don't jump on the bandwagon, love. It's terrible, isn't it? It's frightening. It's really frightening. It's just like you couldn't write it. You couldn't write it. How many times you could get failed. It's really frightening. This tour is called Alien Nation because I felt completely alienated from society, and then in getting my diagnosis, which was not just life-changing, it genuinely saved my life, I discovered that there's a whole planet of us, so it's Alien Nation. So yeah, they're all over the place. There's 13 shows all over the UK as of July, I think. So yeah, come along. The podcast on the road because I wanted to connect with people in real life, and I believe in community. I believe in bringing people together. So I wanted to go to different places in the UK and connect local ADHDers, because so many people say that they feel alone, right? But in doing that, my own what's the word? I guess my own self-esteem that's been bashed throughout my life, you know, I don't feel that confident in. I do feel confident in the cause and I believe in what I'm saying, but I think I don't feel like anybody's ever going to take me seriously. So I kind of had to think about what I do have, like what are my strengths, and actually like my strengths are the jobs that I have had are like organizing parties, like fun stuff. I used to have a festival business, so I'm a festival trader. That's my kind of vibe. So I was like, right, okay. So I want to get around the UK. I want to bring people together. I'm already at parties. How can I make this thing work? So I was like, I'm going to play bingo. So basically, I am giving a seminar, but my imposter syndrome, self-esteem and whatever else wouldn't let me stand there and say, I know X, Y, and Z and I am right and this is why. But on top of that, I also realised that a lot of the people who would be watching my shows do have ADHD themselves, which, as we know, presents differently from every individual. But for me, like if ADHD presents a similar way to in me as it does you, then you're going to get bored of a seminar too. So basically, I created this concept so that I could use the reward system. It could be like, you're going to pay attention because it's a game and it's fun and we're all participating and you can get up and dance and you can sing like we're at bloody Han brunch or something. And then you're going to get the information and you're going to keep paying attention because you might win a prize. You could win the bingo. And so the whole thing is kind of it's symbolic across the board of me finding ways to support myself to be able to do what I want to do, but using the strengths that I do have, the ways that I feel confident, and support, and sort of, putting some support around myself to be able to do that, and then to convey that in supporting my understanding of the ADHD community. So, for a lot of nonsense and leopard print and karaoke and bingo, it's actually very symbolic, and there's some serious moments in it, but I tell ridiculous stories about my life, the most ADHD thing stories, to take the stigma out of the symptoms and to make people realize that if they make these dreadful mistakes and their life falls apart, they're not alone in it. So a lot of my stories are actually very sad, but they tend to get a laugh because in hindsight, a lot of things are funny, especially if you relate to them. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, Laura, thank you so much. We appreciate how open you've been today and sharing your experiences. I think hopefully we can educate teachers, because actually, unfortunately, some of the GPs, our training on special educational needs is also really minimal. So hopefully we can educate teachers. We are the people that are in contact with our next generation the most. So the more we are educated, the more that we can educate our kids, and we can hit this mass and hopefully contribute to this movement. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our listeners. I do want to highlight some ADHD strategies that are typically used in schools. Of course, some of these are from my own experiences, from my family's experiences, but ones that are just very common and quite easy fixes. So the most common one that I find beneficial is that we give our pupils the movement breaks during lessons, especially during double periods. That's really helpful. Fidget tools and doodle books as well. I've spoken to a lot of pupils with ADHD that say that they need to have something else going on whilst they're concentrating on the teacher, just because they need that double focus. So they often have doodle books on the side, and whilst they're looking at the teacher. I want teachers to be aware, because I get a lot of pushback from doodle books, that they are focusing on you. They're not using this as a cop-out for work, which I get a lot of pushback from teachers saying the doodle book is a genuine strategy to help concentration for some pupils. To support pupils with organisation is a massive one, just being that caring, supporting person. Be lenient with deadlines as much as we can. Please know that it's not a choice behaviour, and that organisation is a genuine struggle. But most importantly, just be understanding and caring, and that we are just not naughty kids. That would be the number one, just that care and understanding. So thank you so much for everyone listening, and we hope to see you next week.